Claire, I'd like to talk to you about the house.
Within this old house live two residents. One of them is John Russell, composer, professor. The other has been dead for over 70 years.
That's right. Hey everybody, it's BATJAC J.W. here, and we're talking about another movie. This one here is, it's an interesting film. I remember watching it some time back, and so it's called The Changeling, 1980, George C. Scott. Wonderful haunted house type film with kind of an interesting story. You got kind of a detective story kind of going on. If you're a fan of George C. Scott, I think you're going to really enjoy this one. It's that the cover of the film. I remember this on videotape as well. You got that creepy wheelchair, classic bit. Now, it does have a lot of elements of, to me, like they almost like borrowed a lot of elements from The Omen. Not really in a sense like the whole, devil child. This one's more of like a murder mystery. You got the haunted house thing, going on, which is really, anytime you got a haunted house movie, I'm a sucker for those. I just gotta go and see them, especially ones from back in the day. You got like Legend of Hell House, and of course the classic House, directed by I believe that's Sean S. Cunningham, the guy that actually created Friday the 13th. All those, that whole genre, that whole time period. But this one here is more on a serious note. This is not your usual 80s cheeseball, kind of films. This is really good. I became a really big fan of George C. Scott when I saw Patton. Patton was just, that one sent it over, because to me, he has a voice and a character and a presence that is really good. He reminds me a lot of like those old time days where, days of like Humphrey Bogart, where just their presence, their voice, and just that iconic face that you'll always remember and know. And so George C. Scott definitely hits it a home run on this one. This is I think this is one of the only two of horror type movies he did, and this, and being also, I think 10 years later in 1990 he did The Exorcist 3, which is actually directed by William Peter Blatty, which is the guy who wrote The Exorcist. But no, this one here, this one I think George C. Scott's carrying on, a little older. He's got some age to him in this one, but he has that. I think he really aged well, because in this, and including the other films that he was doing, like especially The Exorcist 3, but like this, he's getting to that point where it's like, he's less patient, but yet still trying to be patient in this one. Like Exorcist 3, he's just totally run out of patience, but I like it because he plays this persona. I believe that, if I remember right, it's been a while since I've seen it, but his family gets killed in a car wreck. And then he goes off and he says, he needs to try to like recoup some, just get back on his feet kind of thing. So he buys this house, moves in, and some, strange stuff starts happening. Things starts moving, the old typical poltergeist kind of thing. And it really starts getting him more intrigued and more in what the heck is going on. And it's like this ghost revenge kind of bit, happening. So he starts in on this investigation, really trying to figure out like what's going on, and people are not giving him answers. And I love it. It's got that, that classic feel of that, like, oh, you moved into that house? You mean that one on, so it really has that feel to it. And I like the way they portray that's such a classic, that I love that, like everybody's talking about it. Like, what, you moved into that place? Like, how's it been? They don't even want to talk about it, really. So he's like, hey, what's wrong with the house? And then there's this distinctive banging, this pounding that he keeps hearing. Oh, by the way, yeah, if you haven't seen it, it's some spoilers here. But, you know, he keeps hearing this, like, banging, this hollowed banging, and throughout time, he keeps, and there's these snip clips of, like, you know, like, hey, you know, there's this little evidence here and there, and he finds this necklace, and he's still trying to dig and find out what's going on. And it starts to kind of drive him nuts. He almost has, like, this cabin fever effect. He's kind of going a little crazy. Not full-on Jack Torrance crazy, but, you know, he's getting there. Ultimately, if I recall right, too, as he continues to try to figure things out, I think he comes to it where there's a wealthy guy that I guess there's something that has to do with it. They drowned this boy in a bathtub, and the boy banging on the side of the tub is ultimately what he is hearing, and the ghostly or the spiritual, paranormal after effects of that. So that's what it's going on, and he has this necklace, and so the boy was in a wheelchair. So, and of course, in the end, you get that classic creepy wheelchair popping out and chasing people around and stuff. And then the things just start to really come apart, and the ending is definitely it's a pretty decent payoff as far as a movie of that time period goes. It does, to me, it holds up fairly well. It stands right up there with movies, like I said, like The Legend of Hell House, if you're familiar with that, or the other one, like The Omen. It kind of stands out there. This one kind of too, like, you know, you remember 1980. Looking at George C. Scott's career and everything he did with, of course, with Broadway and stuff, and you know. This was a movie that it reminded me like the same thing I was thinking of when I watched The Omen. They got Gregory Peck to do The Omen, which was interesting. Here's this guy, you know, George C. Scott, really high caliber actor. They got him to do this like type of haunted house story. I wouldn't consider this so much like you know, it is a horror, but it's not like. To me, when I think of horror, I mean, there's multiple types of horror. You got the Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees kind of slasher, goof flicks in a sense. They kind of became goofy in a sense. And you know, you got The Hills Have Eyes and stuff like that are pretty gritty. But then you got stuff like this, where you got like The Changeling, Legend of Hell House, The Exorcist. These are just really more like thought ghost kind of demonic movies that I think have more of a resonance and more realism to them. They're freaky. They're definitely can have an effect on you. They're definitely creepy in their own way. So like I said, I remember seeing this on videotape, running through the stores and stuff. And you got the reason, like I said, it reminds me of The Omen a little bit, because you got the shadow of the wheelchair, and then it's casting this shadow silhouette of a young boy. And it kind of, if you remember the old VHS cover of The Omen, where it was like the same thing, the kid was casting this shadow, and then you had this really weird and cool shading, you know, of Gregory Peck and Lee Remick in it. So, but yeah, this one, if you're a big fan of George C. Scott, I think you'll enjoy this one. This one kind of goes back, you know, to the old school kind of horror. It's just right in that time period. It's really, I think, being it from 1980, it's kind of that, you know, almost like that point where you had the success of The Exorcist and whatnot, and so you got some movies spawning out kind of like this. And I'm kind of curious now that I think about it. I wonder when The Exorcist, because if you're talking 1980 here, let's actually look it up, because I'm not sure The Exorcist, when it actually came out. I want to say 70s, because I know it was definitely some time back. Back when it still freaks people out. Yeah, so 1973, you have The Exorcist. And then I think before that, you had Rosemary's Baby. So all these type of category movies, that's where I would put The Changeling, where you have The Exorcist, Legend of Hell House, Rosemary's Baby, those kind of movies like The Omen and whatnot. This is where I would put the Changeling. This is where I would put those. So, and a little bit of story time. I guess I'll throw this in as an added bonus. I sometime way back with my buddy in Hawaii, we used to actually ghost hunt. We would go on a paranormal investigations and go to locations that were actually haunted, houses, fields, and stuff, and try to pursue and see if we could capture any kind of paranormal event on either video or audio or something, or photographs, anything like that. And we used to do this kind of stuff. It's really intriguing to me because I find that world is so different that it's like you try to think, like, is it a different dimension? Are they caught between lines? Or is it like an old videotape where it's just caught on a loop and it just kind of goes around and around and around? It's kind of interesting. We had captured some very questionable footage when we were doing this. We went to a bridge where supposedly somebody had hung themselves on, and we went there and tried to see what we could feel, or what any kind of presence there. There was a house that we went to that was definitely, the owner said we just cannot live in it because of the paranormal stuff going on in there. Can we explain going upstairs and all the lights and cameras and batteries and stuff just killing and dying immediately when we had fully charged camera equipment and batteries? So, we would, a lot of times what we do is we'd roll into these places in the afternoon, get everything set up, and we'd stay till 6 in the morning. Because we, throughout the witching hour and all that, whatever you want to call it, this is everything we wanted to investigate and make sure. So it's kind of an interesting thing. If you want to hear more about that, let me know in the comments below, and I'll make a nice little chat box time and event about it. But The Changeling, George C. Scott, 1980. If you haven't seen it, I think it's a pretty decent movie to check out if you like that genre of films. Again, I kind of put that with those kind of films that I mentioned. That kind of area of the horror, if you would call it that. More of a spooky mystery, haunted house kind of thing, solving a murder. He really becomes a really cool detective, and I love those kind of things where it's like the guy's trying to put all the pieces to the puzzle together. I really like those. I think they're fantastic films. So again, Changeling, definitely, it goes and deserves a spot on my shelf full of movies. It's definitely there, along with some other strange ones too. But I love collecting movies because they're just so much fun, and you get to enjoy them from time to time. So this is definitely one of them in the shelf. And my copy specifically, my copy on DVD is a very old copy of DVD, and I purchased this from a local video store in my town that was pretty much going out of business, and was really sad to see it pretty much sell off all of its films and then close down and crumble away to nothing. During that time when all that was going on, when Blockbuster closed and all the local video stores closed in my town, definitely I was one of those guys, screaming and shouting and crying and saying, why does this have to happen? And I was, because that was my childhood. That was a time and era, that was a place that that was my childhood, growing up, going to the video stores, Friday nights, my father, whatnot, going to these video stores and picking out that VHS tape and going home and watching it, and just being that excited. There was something about doing that. I'm so glad I'm from that generation that got to experience that, and I'm so glad I'm not growing up now, because I just think it's just too cookie cutter and lame, and I think it's just, there's no imagination anymore. And back then it was just so much different. So also, what I'd like to do is, I just recently found this out, that Max Wright had passed away. He had appeared in a lot of films, mostly for me, my childhood, Alf. Alien Life Form, yes. The sitcom comedy thing that came out around in the late 80s, carried on through the early 90s, as played a character, Willie Tanner. For me, that was my childhood. I always enjoyed watching that as a kid on TV, and I'm very sad to hear that Max Wright had passed away. So, hopefully he's in a good place and he's no longer suffering. I believe he died of cancer. So anyway, we'll dedicate this one to Max Wright. Thank you guys. Appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to Movie Chat.